The wind howled across the barren plains of Wyoming that winter, a wild song of desolation and biting cold. Snowflakes tumbled in the dark like shards of glass, stinging the skin of anyone unfortunate enough to be caught beneath the storm. The mountains stood like silent judges in the distance, their peaks cloaked in a veil of ice. Out there, among that frozen vastness, a young woman staggered forward, each step heavier than the last, her arms wrapped tightly around her trembling frame. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she was running, not just from the storm, but from a life that had ground her into nothing more than a shadow of herself. She had left everything behind, a cruel stepfather who saw her as nothing more than labor, a town that never once spoke kindness to her name, and a life where warmth was as rare as spring flowers in January. All she had now was the thin dress clinging to her body, a worn shawl, and the faint hope that somewhere, somehow, there was a place where she could belong. That night, the cold nearly broke her. Her lips had turned purple, her fingers numb, her thoughts muddled by the creeping weight of exhaustion. Just when she thought she would collapse into the snow and let it all end, her blurred eyes caught sight of a faint light through the white haze. A cabin. She stumbled toward it, half crawling, half dragging herself across the drifted snow. The cabin sat solitary against the storm, sturdy and unyielding, a single glow flickering from the window. She pressed her hand against the wood of the door, her heart pounding, torn between fear of rejection and the primal instinct to survive. And then, desperate, trembling, teeth chattering, she slipped inside. The warmth of the fire hit her like a blow, overwhelming after the deathly chill outside. She collapsed to her knees, clutching herself as her body tried to adjust. She thought for a moment she had been unnoticed, but a deep voice broke the silence. "What in God's name?" Her head jerked up. Standing near the hearth, a tall figure turned toward her, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and flannel, boots dusted with snow from some chore he'd left half-finished. His face was rugged, with a sharp jaw and tired eyes beneath the brim of his hat. This was Ethan McGraw, a cowboy who had long ago chosen solitude over the chaos of people. Clara's heart nearly stopped. She scrambled backward against the door, hands raised in defense. Please," she stammered, her voice breaking under the weight of desperation. "I'll go if I have to. Just don't throw me back out. I can be useful, stay quiet, just don't throw me out." Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush, raw and pleading. She didn't beg often. Pride had kept her silent in harder days, but this was different. This was life or death. Ethan stared at her, his brow furrowed. He was a man accustomed to silence, not sudden intrusions. For a moment, suspicion flickered in his eyes. Was she a thief? A runaway? Trouble? But then he saw the frost clinging to her hair, the bluish tint of her lips, the violent shivering in her thin frame. "You're half frozen," he muttered. "Lord above." Without another word, he strode toward her. Clara flinched, pressing against the wall, but instead of harm, she felt the heavy warmth of a blanket being draped over her shoulders. "Sit closer to the fire," Ethan said firmly. "Before you turn into ice itself." Clara blinked, disbelief washing over her. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't casting her out. He was helping. She allowed him to guide her closer to the hearth, where the flames crackled and painted her face with orange light. She curled beneath the blanket, hugging herself, fighting the tears that wanted to escape. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the storm outside filled the silence. Finally, Ethan crouched on the other side of the fire, studying her. "You got a name?" he asked. "See Clara," she whispered. "Clara what?" "Whitmore." Her throat tightened. I don't mean trouble. I didn't know where else to go." Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He could see the truth in her eyes, fear, exhaustion, a soul worn thin. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, but there was something in her that reminded him of his own loneliness, that quiet ache that came from being left too long in the cold. "You can stay," he said at last. "But understand this, my home is quiet. You cause no harm, you stay respectful, and you'll have shelter until the storm passes." Clara nodded so quickly it made her dizzy. "Thank you. I'll do anything. Cook, clean, help with chores, just, thank you." Ethan studied her again, then gave a small nod. "Get some rest. You look like you're about to collapse." And so she did. Wrapped in the blanket, curled near the warmth, Clara let her heavy eyes close. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe enough to sleep. When she woke, the storm had passed, but the world outside was still wrapped in winter's iron grip. Sunlight glinted off the snow through the window, and the cabin smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Clara sat up, startled, until she noticed a plate of biscuits on the table, steam rising from a tin cup beside it. "You'll need strength if you're gonna do chores," Ethan said from across the room, his voice calm, almost gruff. Clara blinked at the plate, then at him. He was already busy tending to leather straps, mending gear with practiced hands. She hesitated, then whispered, "You really mean it? I can stay, if I help?" He glanced at her, one brow raised. "I don't take in freeloaders. But if you're set on pulling your weight, I reckon we can work something out." Tears pricked Clara's eyes again, but she swallowed them down. Instead, she reached for the food, her hands trembling not just from hunger, but from something deeper, gratitude, fragile and overwhelming. Days turned into weeks. Clara stayed. She kept her word, sweeping the cabin, cooking when she could, hauling water despite the cold that nipped at her fingers. She was clumsy at first, her hands raw from years of mistreatment, but Ethan never scolded. Instead, he showed her, patiently, quietly, how to do things better. How to cut kindling without splitting her fingers, how to mend torn fabric, how to move with purpose rather than panic. And slowly, the walls between them began to soften. Clara learned that Ethan wasn't just a cowboy, he was a man scarred by loss. His wife had passed years ago, a sickness that no doctor could mend. Since then, he had lived alone, pouring himself into the land, into the cattle, into anything that numbed the silence of an empty home. Ethan, in turn, learned that Clara carried her own shadows. She never spoke much of her stepfather, but when she did, her voice trembled with a pain he recognized, the kind that came from being unwanted, unseen. She wasn't just looking for shelter, she was looking for a reason to keep living. And somewhere between the chores, the laughter that began to sneak into their evenings, the quiet moments of shared meals by the fire, they found something unexpected. Belonging. But life rarely allows peace to linger untouched. One bitter evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, riders came. Men from Clara's past. Her stepfather had put out word, a runaway girl, worth a bounty for anyone who'd drag her back. They stormed onto Ethan's land, their voices harsh, their eyes sharp. Clara froze at the sight, terror rushing back like a flood. "She's mine," the leader spat. "A thief and a burden. Hand her over, cowboy, unless you want trouble." Ethan stood in the doorway of his cabin, jaw set, shoulders squared. For the first time in years, his voice thundered like the storms. "She's under my roof. That makes her under my protection. Now get off my land." The men sneered, hands twitching near their guns. But Ethan didn't flinch. His hand rested calm against his holster, his eyes steady. There was steel in him, the kind that only comes from a man who has lost everything once and won't lose again. The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap, until finally, the riders spat curses and turned away, retreating into the dusk. Clara sank to her knees inside, tears spilling freely. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Ethan knelt beside her, lifting her chin so her eyes met his. "Because I do know you, Clara. You're someone who's been hurt. Someone who deserves a chance at something better. And I'll be damned if I let anyone take that away. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars burned cold above, Clara realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. She wasn't just tolerated. She was cared for. And Ethan, the cowboy who thought his heart had frozen over long ago, found warmth again in the presence of a girl who had knocked on his door not with strength, but with the simple, desperate plea not to be thrown out. Together, they discovered that kindness can rewrite even the hardest stories, that compassion can turn strangers into family, and that sometimes, the smallest acts, a blanket, a plate of food, a refusal to cast someone aside, can change the course of two lives forever. For in the quiet of that cabin, in the midst of winter's cruel grasp, they had both found what they thought they'd lost for good: hope, love, and the miracle of being seen.